So we have a great panel coming up right now. This panel on retail issues is being moderated by Courtland Sandover-Sly, who's a partner at Groundwork Consulting. Wait, just...
It's quick updating.
Good, though.
Very impressive.
Yeah, I know. That was super fast.
Yeah.
Do you want...
Okay, I was trying to advance the slide and we got a little mixed up. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about Courtland because everybody doesn't know him. So Courtland became a financial advisor and started working in cannabis. He's the first advisor to put a health and dental plan into effect for a dispensary. He transitioned to the cannabis industry full-time in 2016, and he sold his business in 2018 and launched Groundwork Consulting and Martindale Farms, which is an organic no-till cannabis cultivator. He's also the president of the BC Independent Cannabis Association. So now let's give him another round of applause for Courtland.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. So yeah, we'd like to bring up the other three panelists. Guys, can you come up? And I'll switch over the seats here. So I'd like to let the panelists introduce themselves individually. Maybe we can start with Raj. Where do you want to go, Raj?
Sure, I can sit here, I can sit there.
There you go. So tell us about yourself and the business that you operate.
Sure, so hello everyone, my name is Raj Grover. I'm the founder, president, and CEO of High Tide Inc. High Tide is in the business of cannabis retail across Canada, bricks and mortar, and online in Saskatchewan. And we also have been manufacturing, distributing, and retailing smoking accessories for over a decade, and our products, which are pipes, bongs, vaporizers, rolling papers, grinders, etc. They're sold in 20 plus countries worldwide. We also have a bit of a niche in the smoking accessory space. We've gone and we've tied down multiple licensors such as Snoop Dogg, Trailer Park Boys, some of the studio relationships that we have like Paramount Pictures and Sony Pictures, etc. And we have the rights to make cannabis accessories with their assets. So that's quite proprietary what High Tide has, but in a gist, we're retailers and we're also manufacturers and distributors of smoking accessories.
Wow. Nice. Jamie Shaw.
They all heard enough about me already.
Okay, well, give us the Reader's Digest version.
Well, I'm one of the founding partners of Groundwork Consulting. As the newly updated slide said, I'm the Director of Communications and Culture for Pasha Brands. I'm also a director on the BC Independent Cannabis Association. I teach a retail course at KPU.
There's a few other things.
There's a few other things.
And Charlie.
Hi, yeah, I'm Charlie. I work for Hanway Associates, which is a UK-focused cannabis consultancy. So a lot of opening up markets and exploring entry strategies for companies based in Europe. I moved to Canada to hopefully be part of and to watch the whole legalization spectacle unfold. So I'm based in Vancouver currently, and soaking up the atmosphere.
All right. Well, so we wanted to jump into a bit of an overview of the provincial situations. Maybe, Raj, you can tell us a bit what's going on in your province, and we can work into a deeper dive after that.
Sure. Alberta has been, I think I have to give it to Alberta. Coming from Alberta, I'm very proud to say that, Alberta took the initiative with both hands, and they were the first ones to execute. And that is the reason why we have 101 stores operating in Alberta today. They just released another 26 stores into the system, and this is way further ahead than any other province in Canada. So I would say Alberta leads the packs there. And from a retailer's perspective, dealing with the AGLC has been great. They have been very responsive to all of the queries. Of course, there were challenges, because of the policy changes and the supply issues and the moratorium, but they're very, very responsive and they keep us in the loop. And I think I truly appreciate that about Alberta. And if I could mention one other province that I think is really stepping it up for cannabis business is Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan's really opened the door for cannabis retail and all cannabis business. They're allowing retailers to do direct delivery to the consumer. That is unheard of in any other Canadian provinces. They're also allowing any retailer to choose any registered licensed producer that is registered for wholesale in Saskatchewan, so we have a lot of choice. And of course, retailers can offer their cannabis offerings through their online platform, which is another unique thing which we don't have in Alberta or elsewhere. So I think Saskatchewan is quite differentiated when it comes to open to cannabis business. And then of course we have Ontario, which went the lottery route. And a lot of the established companies like ourselves and cannabis entrepreneurs that were very keen on opening shops in Ontario. It's been a tough going. High Tide has been fortunate that we were selected to assist 3 winners to help with locations in Ontario, but we're really looking forward to the full rollout coming down for Ontario, and then BC, we're still waiting in line just like everybody else to know what's going on.
BC is well, as Chuck Rafiki said this morning, it's a hostile environment for cannabis. Jamie, maybe you can tell us about
Hostile environment for legal cannabis.
Legal cannabis, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I think, Canada's a big country, so we've got a lot of regional differences, and some of these, were predicted in terms of, Alberta and Saskatchewan were kind of predicted by most people to be ahead of the pack. And they've always been a little bit more open for business, a little bit friendly, but Saskatchewan in particular, being the only province that allows retailers to deal directly with distributors is a direct result of their history with the wheat pool. It took them a long time to get rid of the wheat pool. They didn't like that idea of having like a middleman to kind of coordinate all of this stuff. We saw something similar in Newfoundland where all of the maritime provinces all said, we're going to take a very similar approach. And then Newfoundland went, yeah, but we're not actually going to go the government monopoly model. So it's like we will have government retail stores, but we're also going to allow private stores, which is the only one in the Maritimes that does that. But again, if you look at their history with government-run institutions like the fisheries, it hasn't been good. And so, you're seeing regional differences affect cannabis policy.
Yeah. And I guess, Charlie, maybe you can tell us a little bit about BC.
Yeah, sure. So to kind of unpack the hostile environment, I guess, for legal cannabis. So obviously BC's got this incredible, thriving black market or legacy market, which has been around for decades. I think there's something like 15,000 estimated growers based in BC. They supply 40% of the pre-existing cannabis market for the rest of Canada. They're big on illegal exports down to the US as well. I think Stats Canada estimated the size of the market was something like 2.25 billion in BC for legacy market, which is 1.5 times the sort of the salmon fishing industry in the province, and it's 3/4 of the size of the TV industry there as well. So it's this kind of massive existing market, and again, there's all these sort of regions which are very reliant on cannabis, and it's kind of very much part of the network and the culture there. So BC is definitely different from the rest, I think, of Canada in terms of like its history with cannabis. We've had established dispensaries servicing people for decades as well. In Vancouver and in Victoria, they've taken the steps to almost like license medicinal dispensaries. So there's already this huge, massive pre-existing system. And then the BC distribution system they decided to instigate is kind of like pretty unremarkable. So same as liquor stores, there's a mix of private and government stores. The government does the online only. Everything is sort of centrally warehoused and distributed via the BC liquor distribution branch. Everything's got to kind of come through those guys. There's a restriction on vertical integration, so LPs can't establish direct stores in the province. And I think what you've seen is this kind of pretty standard distribution market is not working for BC currently in terms of transitioning over from a legacy to a regulated market. So, when it was the government, the initial legalization rollout, there was one government store in Kamloops, everything else was online. I think now we've got maybe 20 stores across the whole province, so there's just 3 in Vancouver, I think there's maybe like 3 in Victoria as well. There's, I think, 10 more with conditional approval, but the rollout has been very slow, so everything's been coming through online. And you can sort of just see in the sales how unreceptive BC citizens have been to the legal system. So I think the per capita spend in BC was 38 cents per person in the industry, and when you compare that to the whole of Canada, the average is something like $2.70. So BC has contributed or has had retail sales of, I think, 6.5 million, which is the same as PEI. So I think 5% of cannabis sales in BC are legal. When you compare that to Alberta, it's something like 30% of sales are currently legal. So clearly that system isn't going to work in effectively transitioning over this brilliant pre-existing market. And that's bad for retailers, that means lower take, but it also means that LPs aren't going to be prioritizing BC. Why would you want to strike a deal agreement with a distributor that's just not going to be getting your product, through shelves and into consumers? And so that could mean potentially even, higher prices for BC products, which need to be priced competitively with the black market, and ultimately lower tax take. I think the BC government is already slashed its tax revenue predictions from 200 million down to 68 million. So it's not working for BC, and I think the province needs to really rethink its approach to legal cannabis and what that means. And because we've got this fantastic existing ecosystem already, I think what really needs to be done, and maybe we can discuss this a bit later, is to kind of outdo the market by making canna tourism a thing. So for example, allowing things like farm gate sales, so you can go to an LP and you can buy directly there, recreate this brew pub experience. Or, we've got the Okanagan Wine Valley with 900 wineries across the province. We should be able to kind of facilitate a model which allows this type of thing in BC. Possibly consider things like vertical integration so that micros and LPs can run their own stores and craft that identity. And I think also looking towards Saskatchewan at how they've managed to cut out that middleman and remove that kind of monopoly government bottleneck and allow sales to go direct to retail and allow retailers to compete with the guy on the backpack that Dan Sutton was talking about earlier and allow direct to consumer sales as well.
Right. So Raj, maybe sticking with that theme of the deeper dive, you could tell us a little bit about your experiences with retail and what it's been looking like for your businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, BC has been a challenge for retailers. It's just hard to, we've applied for the respective retail licenses in different cities, and we've been told that it could be months, it could be a couple of years until that gets processed. Again, that doesn't help with the black market situation at all. I understand that the craft industry in BC and the black market has been there forever, and as Charlotte points out, that it's a bigger industry than salmon in BC. It's not going to go away that easily. But I really think that Canada needs to come together as a country on cannabis, because it's just, we have the opportunity to be the country in the world, to be the leaders when it comes to everything cannabis, whether it's concentrates, whether it's showing off how we do responsible cannabis retail, how we grow the best cannabis out there, the IP of cannabis. But I think a lot of this is being lost in the regional wars and just the different sets of policies that every province has adopted. So I think it would be nice if all of that could come together, and the provinces that are not there yet, if you look at Northwest Territories, they're now saying that they want to allow private cannabis retail because they're looking at the success in Alberta, in Saskatchewan, and Yukon has said the same thing. Yukon is saying that they want to phase out government stores by the end of 2019, and they also want to allow private retail. I think that's what makes sense, and government needs to expedite in all of these provinces. They need to expedite. They need to help the retailers that are investing money, creating jobs, and doing responsible retail. I mean, there's a lot of great craft cannabis out there, but do we really know what's on that cannabis? What was sprayed on that cannabis? It is a public health safety issue, and I think that's foremost for Health Canada. So I think they should be a little bit more assertive in creating these guidelines on where these provinces will be heading with cannabis retail. But because they have, the Liberal government or the federal government has just come out and say provinces can come up with their own mandate, it's so unique. It's almost like, United States, where every state is different. So, I hope that from our experiences as retailers and what we're putting out there and what the consumers are saying, and to take the black market out, all of the provinces eventually come together and have a more sensible approach. But I would definitely say Alberta and Saskatchewan are leading the pack.
Right. Jamie, maybe you can talk about that,
There's a few things that have kind of happened in this conversation already that I think highlight some of the issues. I mean, if you're talking about trying to attack the black market or take it out, that's very different than trying to transition it and make it legal. Those are very different tactics. And I think, again, I mentioned this earlier, and I hate to kind of defend the BC government on this, but I get why they're doing this slow rollout. I understand it. I understand why they pushed for the micros, which, took a blow today, and that's now going to be more difficult for them to get local product. And it's interesting parallels to me with BC and Alberta, and they've been having fights, and they're going to turn off the taps, and there's no more wine, and we're boycotting this. I lived in Alberta in the late 80s, and I remember all the exact same conversations that BC is now starting to have about cannabis, Alberta was having about oil, and about how Petro-Canada was taking all of the profits from Alberta's oil and moving the industry all throughout the rest of Canada. And that's exactly the position BC is in right now with cannabis. So I think that's one thing we kind of need to get straight, because again, when we're having conversations and there's things said with, well, who knows what's sprayed on it, that kind of conversation I actually find is starting to kind of devolve, and it's happening a lot, because what we've actually seen is licensed producers spraying stuff that they're not getting caught on. And so the point to agree on is it is a public safety issue.
Sure.
And if this market exists and you want it to be safe, you have to let officials do their job. And they can't do that if it's not legal, if it's not licensed, right?
That's right. And just to add to your point there, you talk about licensed producers that, even they're spraying some stuff and it's coming into the limelight, but at least there's some scrutiny. There's
officials are
watch
allowed to
over
do
it.
their job.
Officials are on it. I heard various companies that had to destroy plants and take a lot of other measures to comply with Health Canada. There's no such no such contingency in place to deal with the illegal growers. So that is my only concern. I know it's not going to.
I think that's exactly the point we were making for
Yes.
legalization in Vancouver in the first place, and in Victoria, is that public safety kind of piece to it.
Absolutely agreed. That is my only concern. I know it's not going away overnight, but I think that's the first priority that the BC government needs to look at. That yes, you're looking at providing top shelf BC product in BC dispensaries or BC cannabis retail outlets, but that cannot come at the expense of not knowing what's on the cannabis. Because I still, as a cannabis retailer, we have the comfort of where we're buying the product, and when we're selling the product to the consumer, they know exactly where the product came from. If there's a recall on that product, there's no such protocols in place for the illegal industry.
Well, that's not entirely true. I mean, first of all, again, that's an argument to legalize it. That's exactly the argument for that. But dispensaries survived in Vancouver and Victoria for so long because they were directly accountable to consumers. They were getting packages in bulk from growers and suppliers. They were able to see it and see if it was fresh or if it was moldy. They were able to test it. People would take it back. It would be returned. There would be recalls, because you don't want to sell moldy cannabis to people. It didn't happen often, but it was there and it was self-regulating. The problem is what we're doing now is kind of creating this weird zone where those reputable gray market people are the ones that are trying to get in, and the barriers are kind of stopping them from getting in. And then what you see is the rest of the gray market that really had no intention of following the rules ever is now thriving even more.
It's the rest of the bad apples, right?
But this is, I think this is this sort of like us versus them mentality, and I don't think it's the right way to think about it. I think it's, and that's not specific to anything.
No, look,
as an industry, we've been talking like that, and I don't think it's the right perspective.
Sure, we all have our opinion on this, and we're very passionate about this. I just think that a lot more needs to be done in BC when it comes to where the industry is today and where it could be going. And again, it's all of that include everybody that's been in that industry.
Which is a hold up on the federal licensing, right?
Included, and it's all to do with the differentiations that we have in the provinces, and of course the federal government saying go figure it out.
Yeah. So kind of adding to this point and talking about transitioning over the market as opposed to sort of stamping it out. In BC, I think, you're right, it's great that the BC government was lobbying for micro licenses. It's great that they're aware, that that's how you're going to bring in this existing industry. But I think one of the biggest problems BC now has is you've still got this provincial monopoly buyer. So if you're a craft micro and you're making maybe 500 kilograms output a year, unless you're compiling with lots of different other micros under the same brand, how is the BC LDB going to deal with purchasing that? If you're going to take such a small quantity order, how are you going to distribute it? Are you going to put it on your online sale? How many stores can you give it to? You can't grant exclusivity to just one store. So when you're kind of having this central gatekeeper, it makes it very hard, I think, for micros and the BC ecosystem to engage in that, because even when these micros do come through, it's going to be very difficult for them to get that retail channel, especially if they can't even open their own stores or they can't sell directly or have a relationship with a few key retailers. So I think that's kind of one of the things where the BC government has been good on this, but I think further down the line, we need to think about how we're going to fully open this up once micros come online.
Well, and I think it's also a concern with, getting out of BC for a little bit and to Saskatchewan again. It's great to say, okay, well, we're not going to have the provincial distributor. I've been a big proponent of that from the beginning. But at the same time, you're now not buying in the same sort of prices that the provinces can buy for.
Sure.
Yep.
Right?
Sure. But I mean, having said that, it gives an, if salmon is so big in BC and cannabis is bigger than salmon, Saskatchewan is opening the doors by saying, look, we're open for business, and people are watching that, and it all turns into investment. It all turns into better product for the consumer, better customer service. When retailers have the option to directly deal with multiple LPs, if AGLC in Alberta says that we're dealing with these 12 licensed producers, that's all the licensed producer options that Alberta gets, that all those 4.3 million consumer gets. In Saskatchewan, when they can go to the craft cannabis guys and some of the smaller guys that didn't make the cut in Alberta or Saskatchewan, I think that really helps. So it's just an open to business signal that Saskatchewan sends. And I like that very much. I just think it's open to business, whether it's a cannabis industry or other industries. And Ontario's got some work to do in that sense. They just made in their budgetary proposal and the statements they made henceforth, they said that they're going to be looking over to the federal government until they're satisfied that the federal government has got it right with supply. That's when they're going to open up more licenses. That doesn't tell us anything.
No, well, this is a lot of political maneuvering and shifting the blame from here to there.
Yes, and that's the only reason why I said that AGLC has at least executed above and beyond than most provinces, that we have 101 locations open, right?
Yeah. Which is, kudos to you for that. Really, it's quite an accomplishment for the province of Alberta, anyways. So I wanted to start talking a little bit more about some of the ancillary products that may be available in retail storefronts, as we call them in BC. We're not allowed to call them dispensaries anymore. So with the concentrates and edibles coming online here, presumably October 17th, but probably not October 17th, realistically speaking. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that and what you see happening there.
Sure. So I think I think edibles will be legalized on October 17th. It's been widely anticipated and talked about. And I don't foresee anything. Of course, there's been a lot of policy changes and anything can happen, but I see that my prediction is that it should happen around that time. And that'll be huge for retailers. I mean, right now, today, retailers are operating at 30 to 33% gross margins in cannabis alone, and that is with the help of a little bit of accessories that we get to sell, which I can touch on a little bit in the stores. But with edibles and concentrates coming in with value-added products, I think this will be huge for the consumer. And a ton of those websites, those online websites that still exist in the illegal market, that are just catering deliveries, direct deliveries, and there's every edible that you can think of and concentrate that you can think of is available so easily in Canada. I think it'll be a big boon, big benefit to the Canadian consumer, because they will really know where that edible is coming from, and that'll be a big boost to retail sales for the retailers like ourselves, because now all of a sudden we're just not bound to 35% of flower sales, which is overall what the mix is between concentrates, edibles, and flowers, will be a large spectrum of products that we'll be able to offer the consumer. So I'm actually very excited about that. And currently what we do to leverage our cannabis sales is, we've been a retailer for 10 years and a manufacturer and distributor for 10 years of smoking accessories, which is a wide variety of smoking accessories. So at Canna Cabana, what we're trying to do is, our model is a little bit different. We're a beautiful looking store. We have that eye appeal, but we're also making it a very practical store. We're considered the one-stop shop of cannabis. So, when a consumer comes in and he's looking for a strain, or they have their concentrates to use, we can't sell concentrates products yet, the paraphernalia for concentrates yet, but we can give them the entire education around it, and we can let them go home with a piece, whether it's a vaporizer, whether it's a rolling paper, whether it's a water pipe, so they can go use their cannabis properly. So we do take advantage of that, and today we're banking only on the accessories other than the dry flower, but that's about to change come October.
So sticking with that theme, Jamie, maybe we can talk a little bit more. What I was getting at with the products not being online on October 17th, maybe you can get a little more into that about where...
We had one nursery license handed out so far. We're still waiting for the micro producers. and it's been 6-7 months. I think I referred to this in an earlier panel. It's like there's the speed of government, and even though it's moving very quickly on this file, it's going to take time. Everything does. It takes time to get the licensing in place, to get the applications in place. Then if they change the rules like they did today, midstream, that causes delays. So I mean, it's definitely coming legally, but it's going to be a while before you see it in stores, which I think, again, kind of highlights, and again, we've been a little BC specific, but BC's not the only place that has this issue. Hamilton has the same issue. Halifax has the same issue, where there are existing stores that have been providing a lot more product than you can get. So it's like kind of touching back on opening more stores in Vancouver. It's like, well, there's lineups outside of all of the illegal stores, and there's more and more lineups outside of the illegal stores as more illegal stores transition over and become legal. The customers stop going there, because right now the experience that they're being offered is extremely different. Right. And so there's also a weird thing where we get into this whole safety thing always, because it's it's fair, but we hold cannabis to a higher standard than we hold pretty much anything else to. If you want to look at like pharmaceuticals or pretty much anything sold over the counter and the list of side effects that it can have, they're a lot more of a danger than cannabis has proven to be. Now, I don't think that means it doesn't need regulation. I think the regulations don't need to be over heavily handed. But again, to my earlier point, you need to allow public health officials to do their job. You need to allow inspectors to go into places and inspect things. You need to make sure that products are being held to certain standards. You just also want to make sure that those standards are so high that it ends up making for a very dry product that's been sitting in a bag for 6 months in a warehouse in Richmond before it can get to the store.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Charlie, yeah.
I went into a legal dispensary in Vancouver the other day, and I asked, what are your most popular strains? I picked up 2 of those. So I'm presuming those are the ones that they're, selling the most of. And then both of them were packaged in November, and they were both just so dry. I haven't seen cannabis that dry since I was in the UK. So yeah, it was like, oh, I know this stuff. Oh, but this is government weed. Okay, interesting. So yeah, obviously there's still like a massive quality price range differential, and I don't think there's any purpose in just trying to force or eliminate a market, where you've got communities where it's thriving and it's working very well. I thought it was quite fun when legalization came over in Vancouver, and I was, it looked like nothing had changed. Like, really, there was no one on the streets, there's no lineups, apart from in all the other dispensaries, all the unlicensed and legit ones, where they're all having like 50% of flash sales, because they're like, woo, we're legal now. And so it was quite a strange position to see. But obviously these things are going to take time, and they need to be well thought out, and there's so many different like moving parts to it and stuff. And once edibles and concentrates do come, and that consumer choice and that range is there, then that will definitely start to make a dent, and the legal dispensaries will become more normal. But for example, at the moment, BC, I think, sorry to go on about BC, but I live there, and I haven't had a chance to see enough of Canada yet.
We apologize for our BC focus.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
I think BC's got some of the the lowest prices for legal cannabis, and yet the dispensary I was in, the markup on the budget strains was twice the price that I can get online at the government store. So there's still this massive price differential, and why on earth would I not just go to my 3 local dispensaries that are around the corner from me that have everything that I need, and I can ask them lots of questions and see my bud, buy it, and know that it's going to be good quality.
Yeah, and meanwhile, we're ignoring all of the online dispensaries that you mentioned, which,
of course,
even when we started talking about regulating dispensaries back, in 2015, that was a point we were trying to make. It's like this argument has been like LPs versus dispensaries, and now it's kind of morphed into, licit versus illicit. But there are large swaths of the population that never have been into a retail store, and they've been ordering from Sofa King Good Bakery. I'm sure I pronounced that correctly. They've been ordering from places and getting those edibles already that way. And so that's a difficult thing to police.
Right. And the other thing I notice, and what Charlotte is talking about, dried cannabis. I mean, as retailers, we deal with these issues. We take a lot of pride in providing a great experience for the consumer, and it's all about the consumer. And it's all about the experience we provide to the consumer, based on which they select us and they come back to us. But we get a lot of love for our customer service and the way, the store looks, and we provide that one-stop shop experience. But they will talk about the dried cannabis. It's a fact. They'll be like, we went home and it's yellow. Unfortunately, this is what we ordered from AGLC. This is what they ordered from the licensed producer. And it's a bit of too much regulation to Jamie's point and to Charlotte's point. If this was a bit more like, let's just look, cucumbers grow, tomatoes grow, and so does cannabis. And we take it from that perspective and don't go overly, imposing on every little bit of that cannabis grow cycle or even the packaging. We get a lot of remarks on packaging. They're like, this packaging takes an hour to open up. I mean, just maybe exaggerating a little bit here, but they're not happy about how much we're wasting through packaging. We put a recycling program in Canna Cabana that any cannabis packaging from any retailer can be disposed of at our locations. But there's a lot of small kinks that need to be worked out still. And of course, the pricing issue that Charlotte talks about, and you talk about, it's quite a big difference from BC and even getting it online in Alberta or Ontario versus what we can offer. But I will come back to the one thing that, we know where our cannabis is coming from, and we know, sure, if we buy it for $11 a gram, we have to sell it for $14 a gram to make 28% margin on it. So there's not so much room there for markup and margin right now for retailers, but I see it changing actually not in the very long term. I think 6 to 8 months down the road, as the supply comes online, the prices will get better in the legal supply.
So I'd like to put you on the spot for a second and ask you a question we didn't cover in our pre-conversation. When do you think you'll sell your first edible?
I think if it's legalized on October 17th, and I think it will happen because the demand is massive, and the governments and across all of the provinces, the regulators know that there's lots of demand there, and people are consuming these edibles from online channels or the legal dispensaries, the storefronts. So I think it'll happen close to October 17th. It'll be legalized on October 17th, but by the time retailers get it in their hands, could be a month or two from there. Okay. So it could be about 30 days, or could be 60 days, but I don't think that it'll be largely into the next year after that where we would be dealing with edibles. I could be wrong here, but that's just my opinion.
I'd be impressed if we got them before.
Yeah, I'd be shocked if anybody has a license to produce in a month, but yeah.
Well, yeah, Jamie, so if you had to choose a date, put you on the spot.
Jeez, I mean, like I said, I would think a year. I mean, you're talking about new licensing people, new licensing inspections, new facilities that are being inspected, new application processes around that. I mean, obviously, a lot of it will be building on what's already in the CTLS, but it's a specialized license that may require a standalone building, is what we're hearing now. So it's.
But lots of companies, a lot of peers, a lot of the individuals and companies that I know that are already on it. They've started acquiring the black market brands, that have completely ready set up. They have the whole infrastructure that is ready to be rolled out, and not one. I maybe know 5 companies that are already starting to do that. So that retail,
but
that
they still
rollout,
don't have the license,
of course,
right? Yeah.
and that rollout. But anything could change, right? Things could still change in the next couple months. Like Ontario said on December 13th, they said, no, we're not going to give you an application on December 17th. We're going the lottery route. So things could still change, but they know that we're anticipating October 17th, as the start of edibles. So I think they'll step it up a little bit, and we'll have something going on here in the near future. But again, I could be totally wrong about it.
And I just think it's a very optimistic view of the speed of government. That's all.
Got to be optimistic.
Yeah.
I want to make sure I get Charlie's opinion on that one too. What do you think?
I don't know. I'm not expecting to see it in 2019. I'm not too keyed into the exact system and process for that. But yeah, I think first quarter of. We're in 2019 right now, aren't we? Yes.
Yes.
Good. First quarter of 2020, I'd be impressed if I start seeing that come through.
Okay. One thing I wanted to touch base on was other models of retail distribution, and I'd like to go, Jamie, you had some thoughts on that initially when we were talking about the retailer processor model.
Oh yeah, well I think Charlie ended up mentioning it earlier. I think there's possibilities and options that people haven't looked at, it won't be much, but one more time in BC. They wrote in the retail regs that they will revisit the possibility of farm gate sales once the micro licenses have gone through. So we're probably going to see farm gate sales there. Of course, we already see it in Newfoundland. But I think one thing that would kind of help a retailer a lot is a lot of your power and discretion as a retailer has been removed by these regulations, and so you get prepackaged product that you don't really get to look at. You only got to choose from a small selection that was already chosen. And so I would like to see maybe models that incorporate a processing license so that Saskatchewan would be a good place to do it, so that you can buy directly from a licensed producer or a standard cultivator. We gotta stop using that LP thing, but the standard cultivator you could buy directly from and package yourself into your own sizes. You can, that's gonna be a lot easier to make sure that it doesn't get quite as dry as it does when you package it all into little 1 gram things. And so, I mean, I think there's a lot that we can see coming in the future, especially around edibles.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, and I'd like to just touch on canna-tourism a little bit as a model to complement retail. Raj, maybe you could talk a little bit about that. Do you see a future for canna-tourism and ancillary models of revenue?
Yeah, I think I see it happening now because Canada has federally legalized it, and Alberta is at the forefront of it, and we have a lot of cannabis retail stores opened. We get a lot of customers from overseas. We get a lot of customers from the United States, and even intertourism between the different cities and provinces in Canada, where we see these dollars trickle into the provinces, which is very good for business. But I think because Canada is so far ahead from any other country, even United States, which is deemed to be 2-3 years out, it could be even longer, who knows. I think it'll be and once with the introduction of edibles and concentrates, where people don't only have the option of, you have to smoke your cannabis, I think that'll be huge for canna-tourism, and Canada will be at the forefront of it, and all retailers will get the benefit of it, and there'll be a lot of tax dollars that trickle into each one of these provinces, for sure.
And that'll be accelerated if you're actually allowed to consume the product anywhere.
Yeah, that's good.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Consumption lounges, and I think
Exactly.
that's, I think once the edibles are legal, I think there will be some regs that'll come out. Ontario tried to do that last year, where they said, okay, you can consume it, and then they quickly backtracked from it. They said, no, we're rethinking this. But I think that's inevitable as well. Like Colorado, I believe Colorado and Nevada just recently,
Las
or
Vegas
just maybe
did.
today or yesterday, legalized consumption lounges. And I think that's an inevitable. It will come to Canada in the very near future. I think it could be 2020 or 2021.
Charlie?
Yeah, I think something like, not even a consumption lounge, but you can have a consumption cafe or something, which would be, quite nice and maybe a more easily accessible entree. And then canna-tourism sounds obvious, but it's like the one place where really the new market can actually outcompete the black market, because you can actually say, open your doors, say, hey, come here, experience this, especially if you have things like farm gate, or you can go and view like a processor, see how everything's being sold, and then purchase from there. That kind of that openness gives an opportunity for, it reframes cannabis, as not just this vice, but it's an inclusive experience, and it's definitely something where I think it should be embraced by every province who kind of really wants to make the opportunity to make cannabis work for their province, where you can just invite people in and make it an experience and kind of put it on the par with something like a winery or a farm tour, and to kind of treat it in that way, I think is definitely where the legal market has great opportunities, and if the regs allow, then I think that can just be capitalized across the whole of Canada.
Okay. So I think at this time we'd like to open it up to questions from people in the audience. I know there may be a few, so people want to raise their hands. Andrew, get us started. Microphone, hang on. Oh, wait. Just yell at us.
Hi, Kenny. So I think ultimately I'd like to see a migration from the illicit to the licit. We're going to always have a structural difference, but the faster we migrate. And the panelists, what's going to be the faster catalyst? Price or selection? Are we going to have to catch up to the selection of the black or the illicit? Or is price going to be the primary driver of the two?
Sure. I think I can answer that a little bit. In my experience, so I would say the supply. Let me give you Alberta as an example. So we have up to about 100 strains in our store right now in Calgary, and I think that's superb variety when you're looking at cannabis. Customers come in and they're like, "Wow, you guys have a lot of variety," and we hear that all the time. So I think from a supply perspective, we are already getting there, which is very exciting. And of course, the more the merrier. But I think price is a huge dictator in this conversation. And that's simply because people have, they did a survey and they said, when you're buying it an ounce from the black market, in Ontario, you can get it for $6.75 a gram, roughly. That's what it comes down to. Let's say in Alberta, it's $7.75. We're far off from these prices. We're 40 to 60% away. Some cases, 80% away from these prices. So I think prices will be the biggest differential on how quickly we can transition from the black market into, or the illicit market into the legal market.
You're transitioning consumers from one to the other.
Yes, sure.
I mean, I think you're also talking about, this is where the regional differences come in, because in BC, it's quality. They'll pay more if the quality's worth it, but if the quality's worse, they're not going to pay more. You know, if you see other places like Alberta, Prince Edward Island, it is going to be a lot more about price. I mean, quality will matter, but they're not as spoiled as the West Coast is. We're really, really spoiled, and it's, when you travel the world, you see just how spoiled we are and just what a little bubble it is. There's very few places in the world like that, Northern California being one of the other ones. So yeah, it's going to depend a lot on the region too, I think.
You know, and I'd just like to also say that there may be 100 SKUs at your location or at the stores. You know, when you look at the ALCB and the SKUs on board, 85, it's an 80-20 rule. 85 to 90% of the SKUs are coming from the top 4 or 5 companies.
Yes.
And that's not variety. That's the same stuff packaged differently. And consumers are sophisticated. They're going to figure it out pretty quick, right?
You're totally right about that, but if you, you know, that's not variety, but it's much better than from the 10, 15, 20 strains that most people have been anticipating what we will get. I mean, Aurora's doing MK Ultra, Afria's doing Broken Coast, which is craft cannabis. And you know, there's a few other brands out there. I could name you a lot of brands that are purely craft cannabis, and people come and ask us with those brand names. We're not all the way there yet, not even close to it, but it's nice to see that variety coming in. When we first started on October 17th, or Canna Cabana started on October 27th, we literally started with, you know, 6 strains of cannabis, 8 strains of cannabis. Now we have 100. So that's a big progression. And in 2 months, that could go up to 150, including a lot of craft cannabis strains. Yeah.
So kind of adding my little thought in there, I think you can kind of split the market slightly when it comes to range versus price. I mean, I think sort of daily and regular users are the biggest by far. I think it's like something like 20% of all cannabis users drive 90% of sales. So if you've got, you know, a daily regular user, quality is going to be very important, but I think price will be very significant. When it comes to maybe the more casual user, so someone who is picking up just, you know, a vape pen, or they're picking up some edibles, for example, you know, you're going to be going to the legacy market for that right now because they don't exist. When these things start coming in and they're in the legal sales, I think when you get the kind of the casual users, people just picking up on a Friday night with the girls, I think that's when you really start seeing them come over to the legal market and start seeing that kind of that loyalty grow there. But I think for regular users, I think, you know, price is going to be very important, and also, as Jamie says, like, quality is going to be very important too.
Depending on what you're used to.
Yeah.
Craig?
Raj, we went to one of your stores, and we went to a number of stores in Alberta or in Edmonton. And one of the things we noticed is they all have varying vault sizes. Mm-hmm. Some of them are constrained, some of them have room. How are you going to mentally provision beverages which take up such a large spot of floor space, whether it's vault space, or if it's on your floor, it's got to be under lock and key? What's your mental process to say, how are you going to enter the beverage side of the market when they become available if you have scarce vault space?
That's a great question, and I know a couple members of AGLC were here, and I hope they're listening to this. And you know, it's all work in progress, but we factored in as Canna Cabana, we factored in as a minimum footprint of going forward with stores of minimum 1,500 square feet. And we want to give a lot of that area to the backroom area where you store your cannabis, which is everything related to cannabis right now. Right now, we're building them around 200 to 250 square feet, and we're using about, currently with the supply rolling, we use about 25 to 30% of that space. So I'm quite confident with edibles coming in, we'll be fine, but depending on what the rules are around beverages, where can you store them, you know, maybe there'll be a bit more leniency provided that, you know, you can leave them in the cases, you can leave them in the showcases because of how bulky they are. So and this is, again, it varies province by province. Like Ontario says, we just opened a store in Sudbury and Hamilton, 2 stores, and we don't have to take our cannabis away and put it in the cannabis storage rooms. And this is very different from Alberta. Everything has to be emptied at the end of the night. So it's going to unfold, and I'm sure AGLC will consider these things and they will take, AGLC is just, again, one province I'm talking about, but Ontario has no restriction on that. Saskatchewan may come up with certain regs, but we are keeping this, we are factoring this ahead of time, saying that, yeah, if we're factoring in 250 square feet right now and we're using 25% of it, we may want to go to 400 square feet, just in case. And you can tier it up if you have high ceilings, so that's lots of room. So that doesn't concern me too much at this point.
Anything else you guys wanted to add to that one? Space?
To Raj.
My name is Ray. We own the liquor store, and we're in the queue to open a cannabis store as well. I think price is irrelevant. The government will charge whatever they want for cannabis, the same as they do for alcohol and cigarettes. Once they have control of the market, they will charge whatever they want, and hopefully they'll leave us a little margin as they do in the liquor stores. I'm curious how BC and Alberta or Saskatchewan are going to get around that, because the government says it's all about safety and keeping kids away and stuff, but it's about the tax, right? And so BC's gray market, how are they going to collect the tax? So they're going to transition to a legal market. There's going to be a little pushback on that. And Saskatchewan, if you can buy direct from the supplier, how are you going to collect the tax?
Yeah, well, and I mean, so in BC right now with craft beer, it's like a tax stamp that you can add yourself. So you don't, in the distribution system in BC, one of the other issues that we were having with it when they rolled it out was that everything gets shipped to a warehouse. And we were trying to explain that you don't need to do that. In today's world, you can track things without actually sending it all to a physical location and counting it. And and that type of thing needs to be more implemented, and then you can deal with that. There was a tax piece, and even that's a little more nuanced than most people think. There have been tax cases around dispensaries, for example. Most of them have been remitting taxes, even though they have no license and even though they're illegal. Some of them, of course, have not, which is going to be a serious problem when they try and get legal. Probably one of the bigger problems to encounter, but some of them have. I think you're going to see the issue more when we're seeing edibles and concentrates and topicals, because they were able to kind of avoid that. And so it was dispensaries that were paying taxes and sometimes the growers that were paying taxes, but not necessarily all of the product manufacturers were. And so that may still be an issue and a barrier for sure.
Now you're getting into auditors.
Exactly.
The Alberta model is perfect, right? The government owns the dope, they're going to sell it to us. We can take what we can, just like they do in liquor.
Yeah, they need some sort of controls put in place. I agree with Jamie that in today's world, the tracking to that level, maybe it's unnecessary. Get into the warehouse first, stock it, count it, then reship it out. These are all, they cost extra dollars. Now, these expenses get passed on to us, we pass it on to the consumer. So we can definitely save there. But I think having one wholesaler monitoring and dealing with everybody is not a bad idea, because the Saskatchewan rollout, although I like it, I like the fact that it's open for business, there's still a lot of unknowns around it. How are they going to collect the wholesale taxes, if any? If they're going to impose that on edibles and concentrates, how that's going to work out, it's unknown. But Alberta model is quite stable. At least we know what's on the offering. We see the strains. We have a weekly routine when the shipments get delivered, when we can order. It's very smooth so far. All of the rollout is very smooth. The challenge is that we have stores built and we can't bring them online, and I think the market should dictate. But barring that, the entire rollout has been quite smooth. We haven't had any major issues in Alberta to talk about as per se. Well, we have 101 stores though. We have 101 stores open, and they're keeping that eye on the supply, right? And I think they've done a good job lately with going from 65 stores to 101, because they're constantly monitoring it. Ontario has 19 open. Saskatchewan has 51 open. So it varies widely, but I think we're still a little bit further ahead in Alberta.
Brandon Wright. Oh, sorry, wait, were you going to add something?
I was just going to say I'm a Brit, and so I have absolutely no idea why your government is involved in selling liquor or cannabis at all. It's been very strange for me to get my head round. So I'm kind of coming at this from a kind of culturally quite a critical perspective. Yeah, I think there is roles in provincial wholesalers, in being able to agree a good negotiation wholesale price. I think there's value in that. I don't think the fact that if you were going to eradicate that or supplement private retail supply chains, it's not insurmountable. You know, you see it in the US, taxes are still applied, they're still collected. It's certainly a way to do it. You don't need the government mediating in any other industry, and I presume that the same can be done for cannabis. There's definitely pros and cons to each. And I think I quite like, I know you were saying earlier that you almost want Health Canada to kind of give more direction on provincial control. I quite like the fact that there's actually a natural experiment and that you are seeing these provinces, you know, tailoring and tweaking their strategies to adapt to the situations. I think that's great. I just want to encourage more innovation, more tinkering, and, you know, learning from best practice as opposed to sort of a national top-down, this is the system and this is what you have to follow. So I think it's nice that you've got these two options, and I think hopefully time will tell which works best.
Sure, would it be learning from best practices when there's so many different models and systems? And BC is just, you know, hooked on what BC wants to do. Alberta is, this is how we're going ahead. Saskatchewan is all over the place with completely open for business approach. So, and I don't think there's a mandate here to bring it together in the end. That's exactly what I was talking about. Sure, this could be a great national experiment with keeping it in mind that Health Canada comes in eventually and says, this is what we're going with. This is what best practices are. And to some degree, this is what we want to do, because otherwise it's a confusing market. It sends confusing signals to the consumer, to the investors, you know, to the people to the countries that are looking at how Canada is regulating this, because Canada is regulating this as a country, not piece by piece. But right now we're completely dealing this piece by piece. And I get it as a national experiment that makes sense, but only if it comes together and we do take best practices out of it.
But again, we're a big country. I mean, we started this whole panel by talking about what a big country we're,
Sure.
and regional concerns are quite distinct. And again, it's like people keep kind of hammering BC, but it's like BC's got the hand it was dealt, right? That's what it's got. It's got,
Tough gig. Yeah.
you know, $1 billion underground economy that is now legal, that they can't figure out how to get into the legal system.
Sure.
And again, then you've got other provinces like Alberta, where you didn't really have that large, you still had delivery services, you still have your guy, there's still online sales in Alberta, but you never had that kind of a massive, almost above ground sort of industry to deal with, and so it was a blank slate, and so it makes sense, you can do more. Right.
They were basically taken down as soon as they came up in Alberta.
Yeah,
but online has been thriving in Alberta too.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Well, because that's what happens when you close down the brick and mortar. It just goes online.
Wait, we have time for 2 more questions, so we'll go to Brandon, and then anybody else has
well, my question's almost facetious at this point, because I was going to ask about fragmentation in the retail industry, but more specifically wanted to talk about best practices. And because in the past years, we've known of associations and so forth that have promoted best practices within dispensaries. I've been part of national associations myself that Jamie's been part of as well. But we don't yet see that on the retail side, and yet it seems to be the most important now of all times. Is there anything that you guys see on the horizon in terms of associations or developments of best practices that can be taken from province to province and expanded upon, and saying this is the way you're doing it now and this is the way that it could be triggered or adjusted to make things more efficient or better?
I think this is a good regulatory question for you, how they would.
Yeah, well, I think it's a mad scramble right now, right? It's like,
It's a mad scramble.
Everybody in Ontario was all ready to go, you know. Well, first they thought they were done because it was Wynn was going to get in again and nobody was going to be able to have a store.
Right.
And then it turned out to be Doug Ford that got in, and there had been a lot of lobbying done on them to try and make that a more of a campaign issue than it was. But at least we did get them to make the statement, we'll go private. So then they get in, now you've got private, and they're suddenly like, oh crap, how do we do this? And so the lottery thing, again, I can't believe I'm defending a Doug Ford decision at this point, or the Ontario government at all, but the lottery decision, I'm gonna kill myself for saying this, but it was kind of smart. From one perspective, it made sense to sort of put the brakes on. You can't give out 500 licenses. You can't do it. I mean, the choice of doing it by lottery was maybe not the wisest choice, and there were examples in Vancouver of why that doesn't necessarily work. But that is actually a standard practice in a lot of other types of bylaw cases that don't involve cannabis. When you've got clusters of things that aren't supposed to be clustered, that's sort of a standard response. So, yeah.
No, sure, I'm just glad I'm not talking about BC with you. I'm talking about Ontario, but I'm going to take you on this one. And you know, I'm a fortunate recipient of getting to work with 3 winners, which is very exciting. We got most licenses that we're working with than anybody else in Ontario. As I said, I'm very thankful for that. But the last winner that we're dealing with in Ontario is a family therapist, Dana Larson, and she's amazing, and she's a great human being. She has that entrepreneurial spirit, but she doesn't know where to get started, and so do the other two winners that we helped out. They're tax lawyers, and one is an executive in a public company, and they had absolutely nothing to do with cannabis, but they were excited and interested in learning more about it and getting involved with it, and applied for a lottery with $75. And guess what? Doug Ford government, although, as I said, I'm the recipient of it, and we're kind of ahead than some of our peers, but I still feel that, companies like ourselves, entrepreneurs in BC that have been in the industry for a long time, in Ontario that wanted to go open shops, and we were ready with our infrastructure, we had done everything we could, all of a sudden we were taken out because there were 50,000 applications that went in, or whatever that number was.
60 stores in Hamilton were in
right,
the same
and these
boat,
people,
and,
but these people don't know how to do responsible cannabis retail. So when we're talking about, there's products out there, that we don't know. We're not talking about BC in particular, but there are products in the system that are coming from all over the place. And this particular thing of doing responsible cannabis retail, of telling the consumer what's in the product, that's again with 25 stores, that just does not help a province like Ontario. We have 1,580 liquor stores in Alberta, and we have 101 cannabis stores already. I think we'll end up with 6, 7,
they're still sold out.
900.
They're
right?
still
And
having problems
and we're
stocking
all sold out,
themselves,
right?
right?
Ontario has 600 liquor stores, which is again a far cry for liquor, but they only have 25 stores, and they don't know when they're opening up for more stores. So I think that they missed the trick a little bit on doing it through lottery. They could have allocated 200 stores, and now they're saying we're going to deal with pre-qualified candidates.
But you saw in Alberta where they said last November, we're going to have 100 by the end of the month. And then 2 days later,
Not always true.
oh, there's no supply. Wait, no,
Sure.
we pull that back.
Sure.
You see in Newfoundland where people have gone bankrupt because they got their license and they're now no product. And so
But-
they had to close 2 or 3 days a week randomly all the time. So that there's, I mean, I would love to see 1,000 stores in Ontario, but until the supply's there, there's just, it's a problem.
But
right?
there are 101 stores in Alberta. There are 51 in Saskatchewan, and we are fully loaded. Like I said, we have 100 varieties
We
of
had
cannabis.
100 just in Vancouver.
Sure.
I mean, I'm just,
Not denying BC's way ahead
Great.
when it comes to, leading the cannabis retail.
I'm just
but-
mean in terms of market size, right?
But
So
the
it's-
legal market supply, it is constantly getting better. And if Ontario just had to take a cue, it could take that cue from Alberta, that there are 100 stores in Alberta. So what are we doing with 25 stores? We could have another 75 stores at the bare minimum. But again, we could argue about this, right?
It's just, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with anything you're
Right,
saying. I actually
right,
agree with you, except for the shortage issue is a major.
It is a
it's
major issue.
issue.
There's no doubt
So,
about it.
Tommy, I don't know if you guys all know, he's one of my favorite stories. I met him at Lyft last year. He comes up to me and he goes, "Do you know who has a license to sell cannabis in Newfoundland?" Canopy, Loblaws, and me, Tommy. And he runs this little store, and he's a retailer. And one of the things that he's been put into is because Canopy also has licensed retail in the province. They're a supplier to the province.
Mm-hmm.
He often has tweed as the only product in his store, which is not really, he's now selling his biggest competitor's product to the exclusion of all others because it's not available, right?
Yep,
So, I mean, I just think it's really important to kind of, that's a teeter-totter.
To have the
right?
balance, yes.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, we got 2 minutes, so keep it real quick. You can yell. Where am I
So
looking?
I've been to almost all 100 stores in Alberta, and I do see store owners getting nervous already about, it's kind of a double-edged sword with the legalization of so many stores, and I think they said, was it 200 by the end of this year? So there's a lot more coming. If you look at a relatively small city like Medicine Hat, they already have 6. So yeah, they're selling out in a way, but they're selling out of their top strains first. So people will walk in and say, do you have this or that, or high THC? If they don't have anything, they walk out the door, and they could go to 5 dispensaries. I mean, it takes 20 minutes to do that. So I guess I'm wondering, 100 stores in Vancouver, is that feasible? Is that going to be a feasible amount of stores? If you look at a market like Alberta or Saskatchewan, where we don't have the level of maybe smokers that you guys have, it looks like stores are already worried about going out of business, and as a rep and being on the road and talking with all of these stores, I'm nervous for some of them. Like, I can see a lot of them going out of business before the end of the year.
So the 100 store number in Vancouver was actually illicit stores, and that's what the market was supporting before regulations started coming in and everything else. But we're talking about very different markets with very different products with very different consumers at the moment. Ideally, we'll blend that and that'll all be one. So that was just an example of the size of a market. And, you know, BC is sort of known for using a lot of cannabis, but oddly enough, it's actually Nova Scotia that smokes more per capita than anybody else in Canada. And all of those percentages are not that far off.
Alberta was the second highest per capita.
Yeah, the numbers are a lot closer than people think usually, but it's been a more open in BC, so it's been, you know, that's kind of now the curse, because now you've got all of these businesses that can't find a way in, and they had been accepted, at least to some degree, for a long time, so.
And actually, well, we're out of time, so we've got to call it there.
All right.
One more time, we'd like a round of applause for the audience, or for our panelists.
Thank you.
Jamie Shaw, Charlotte Bowyer, and Raj Grover. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Raj. We're going to like toe-to-toe here and
Now we need
get
to go
into it.
back
Yeah,
and have some fun
exactly.
together.
Hey, good job.
Cheers, bud.
Just wanted to.
Okay, well, we have come to the,
One thing first,
yeah,
if you don't mind. That panel was sponsored by Burnt.
yeah.
We missed that at the kickoff, so we just want to thank Burnt for sponsoring that panel. And Courtland, thank you for pinch hitting for us. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, thanks so much.
Hey, I have just been blown away by the depth of insights we've heard today. I want to thank all of our speakers and panelists for sharing their knowledge with us. And I also want to thank our amazing sponsors and all of you who are left for being a part of this event. It meant a lot to us to be able to host this in my hometown of Edmonton. I'm sure you've been impressed by some of the Alberta-based companies that you've heard about, and you'll want to follow or invest in or buy their products and services.
Okay, and just before I give my closing remarks, a little piece of news that I don't think anybody has heard yet. Hot off the press, hot off the wires, the Cannalysts have been chosen. They are the official podcast for the Lift Expo in Toronto 2019 this year, so congratulations to the Cannalysts. Official podcast sponsor. Okay, so I would also like to thank our sponsors, speakers, panelists for making today so special. Everybody who came out, we had amazing, amazing industry leaders and influencers on the stage today, and I hope you all learned something that you can take away from that experience. Tremendous energy here in Edmonton. It has really just added fuel to the cannabis fire here in this province. We, Grant Thornton, we work with many businesses in the broad cannabis supply chain. We work all the way from startups to companies that are looking for financing or investors, companies looking to IPO or maybe to exit, or some companies that actually just want to grow a really good business. So we would love to work with any of you that are kind of in that boat. So you can reach out to me or you can reach out to our local team. We would really love to work with all of you.
Before I sign off, Christy, our conference mom, thank you so much.
Thanks, Christy.
FMD. Thank you so much. Grant Thornton's events team is great to work with, and they certainly help a shop with as little bandwidth as we have do some pretty impressive things. I want to thank you on behalf of Grant Thornton and the Cannalysts, the gracious sponsors of the conference, and really the speakers that come out. They're the bait, right? And it's always good. I said this is about learning, and it is about learning. I hope you learned. I hope you met people that'll be helpful for you. And so thank you for being part of the second WECann conference, for addressing current cannabis topics and future considerations. You all play an integral role in moving this forward and changing the stigma and adding your voice to this file. So on behalf of everyone who sat here all the way through the end to drink from the firehouse, thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Woo. I think we're dropping the mic.
There we go.